Alex. How you doing? Good to be here at our first live event.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for sorting this out. It's fantastic and exciting to be here and talking about disruptive tech.
It sure is. And for those of you that haven't seen us before, we both work at the University of Salford, and this is part of a new series of events that are taking place as part of our research cluster looking at disruptive technologies. And Alex, I wonder if you might kick us off by telling us a bit about the cluster, how it's come about, and what it is.
Absolutely. So at Salford, we've always had a reputation for working with industry and doing quite practical things, with our staff and students and kind of practical research. More recently, we've kind of refocused around industry collaboration, and particularly around topics like robotics and smart living and digital and so forth. So as a response to that, in the business school, we've reframed our research centres, and we've got several centres now, 5 kind of new centres, and one that I head up is called the Research Centre for Disruptive Technology. So this is all about different types of technologies, from virtual reality and augmented reality to artificial intelligence, and the ethics behind those things. But we're very much looking at this, Andy, from an angle of looking at technology for good, so digital transformation or innovations which can, benefit people in some way, individuals or businesses, and create new business models and so forth, being a business school. But we pulled together some really exciting members of, academics within Salford Uni, but also other universities and people from industry as well. So it's actually been really, it's only a few months old, but it's been really exciting to have those conversations, and obviously it's the first time we've done a public event like this as well. So thanks for sorting that, Andy.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I think one of the things that's really wonderful about working at Salford is just how much people collaborate across disciplines. So it's great that this cluster has within it people from all over the university. And I think that's partly because we are very applied and industry focused as an institution, which allows us then to sort of dip in and out of different areas. We just had our sort of bi-weekly meeting, didn't we, earlier? And we talked about things from artificial intelligence to virtual realities. I think that's one of the really great strengths of Salford.
I think you're right. And obviously there are, schools drawn up for purposes of, talk sessions and things like that. But there's some great opportunities for us to collaborate, because you and I, Andy, obviously we're interested in digital technologies and sport and esports, and we've written things about that. So from a research perspective, or looking at things like PhD supervisions and, events that we run, like at Media City UK and online, there's tons of ways for us to sort of collaborate with other interesting people within the university and beyond. And sometimes we can sort of bring that sort of overlaps for teaching as well. So I guess this session of live events is a good example of that, how we kind of cut across the different schools and go beyond the university into different sectors as well, and countries sometimes as well.
I think one of the reasons why we wanted to set up this event series is to find a number of really amazing people who have a lot to say about disruptive technology, who can really sort of inspire us to think critically about what it is we're doing. Because I suppose one of my challenges with disruptive technology is that often technologies are disruptive until they become absorbed into the system, and then I guess go mainstream. And then there's a new kind of equilibrium that's achieved at that point. Like I'm thinking of things like Amazon delivery robots, which now are being tested around the UK. And yet where I live, it's still not at a point yet when you go out into your local town, you're seeing Amazon robots sort of rolling around. But you can imagine in easily 5 years, that's going to be the case. So there's a kind of emerging normal that then becomes, does it sort of diminish the disruptiveness of the technology, or is that part of the process really?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously I'm looking at a black and white box as what is disruptive technology. So that's, I think you put that very articulately as usual. And I think if you think back to, I did like a media tech undergrad degree over at Bradford in the sort of mid-90s. And that was just when the sort of the internet was coming along. It seems weird now to say that, doesn't it? Because a lot of our audience will be like, what? The internet used to not be a thing, So, we had, our old like Amiga 500s plugged into halls of residence, and, chatting to Americans at whatever kind of time of day and night, and doing email and things like that. But I remember after I did a foundation year, because I did kind of arts-based A levels, and I was going to a BSc, and one of the guys on there, I think the course commissioned him to write a little report on what the benefit of the internet was to this course. And the sheer think of it now is ridiculous, because even a few years later, it was the course, so it was disruptive. The internet, email, websites were disruptive at that point, but quickly became pretty ubiquitous, And then a few years later, I took a layoff and then a master's in creative tech at Salford. And then it was just when sort of mobile devices were really starting to gain some traction, was like making game-based learning, content management systems, and getting to work on an iPad Touch, for example, and it looked really kind of cutting edge. But now if you talk about mobile tech as disruptive, well, no, it isn't, because everybody's got a smartphone, haven't they? So it's that kind of it's the old curve, isn't it, of kind of early adopters, and whether that technology's got the capability to disrupt something, or whether it's just ubiquitous or not, I guess.
Yeah, massively. And keen to disrupt through these events too. So we're experimenting with this platform StreamYard that allows us to broadcast across different environments. So we're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the moment. So you can check in each of those channels to see what's happening, but also comment and ask questions within them too. And they'll pop up in our feed that will let us know what you're thinking about, what interests you. And we've got the hashtag Passion for Digital as well. So feel welcome if you're out there watching to use those hashtags either during the live event, or if you're watching it on catch up, then please do use that to connect in with us. We're really keen to hear from people, to understand how others make sense of that concept of disruptive technology. And I think it's so fascinating. There's so much about digital that is transformative in profound ways. And yet I still sort of think about, there's still a lot of people talk about building websites as if they're the only thing to be doing. And I think whilst you said that sort of smartphones are ubiquitous, there are still people that don't have smartphones. I did an event for the Scottish Parliament at the weekend, which was a kind of COVID inquiry looking at public communications. And it was set up as a kind of world cafe. So you had citizens from all over Scotland that were present within it. And I opened up my session talking about TikTok and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And there was a lady there who certainly was over 70 years old. And she said, I've got no idea what you're talking about. She doesn't have a smartphone. And certainly a lot of what I did when I was in Scotland was focusing on the population of people that have not yet made it online. I know there's a lot of work in that. I think there's a project around sort of 1 billion people that still aren't online, and trying to facilitate activity for them to make sure you can bring them into that world, because it's such a crucial part of being a citizen now, just making sure that you can access things.
I think that's an interesting point. I've been working up in Scotland myself recently with a Rangers football club and the charity foundation, and we did a bit of a survey before we started this kind of, we'll call it a kind of disruptive tech project around digital health, looking at heart disease being a major killer, and the sort of power of fandom to tackle that. But when we did a survey beforehand, we found that like 98% of fans had an Android or an iPhone device. But they want, there are fitness apps out there. Of course there are, and people can use them and download them. But what was a little bit disruptive is the fact that we used the Rangers brand and the information and the social capital that sort of developed around the fandom to create a fitness app that was, you didn't just have to have a Fitbit or a Garmin. You could just use the smartphone or any of those bands and start to compete. So the disruptive element wasn't the fact it was a fitness app or the fact it used smartphone. It was the fact that it was sort of applied in a different sort of way that hadn't been done before. And now, obviously, from there, there's plenty of other disruptive technologies you could do to kind of differentiate it even further, I suppose, But that's a kind of start point, isn't it? Building out on the fact that smartphone ownership was quite high. But having said that, there is that sort of digital divide. Even I suppose you could argue the survey we did, if you didn't have a phone or a digital device, you wouldn't be able to fill that in any way. So there's obviously a section of people that don't have access to these things as well, which we need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and certainly I think it changes over time as well. I mean, I think I have an Android and I have an iPhone, and I'm aware that certain things you can do on an iPhone that you can't do on an Android. So these are still sort of zones of exclusivity.
Yeah.
And I think one of the aspects of that, and I think we're going to get into that in our next session, which will be around fashion, but it's how a big part of this is the culture of adoption that people
Yeah.
find themselves part of, or not, as the case might be. I remember, and you will remember, when I joined Salford, I was wearing my Google Glass, which was at the time a major sort of technology that was seen to be transformative, but of course it never took off as a consumer item, despite
Yeah.
having a big impact. But it was a great example of something that was, I think, genuinely disruptive.
Mm.
But of course, there's a question mark over whether something is able to really achieve that in a significant way without mass adoption. And yet mass adoption is a kind of route towards banality almost. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
it has to remain niche to keep being disruptive almost.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? I thought a lot of people say about Google Glass that, it was a failure, but actually, there's a lot can be learned from that experiment. And I'm pretty sure that, the idea was to put that out there, and it moves the kind of situation along some, doesn't it? Because I mean, technologies exist, don't they? But sometimes it's those sort of people factors and the infrastructure that, the people weren't quite ready for that incarnation of wearables. But then you've got Apple are on board with producing their version in the pipeline. So I suppose from that perspective, once Apple get on board with it and design something that solves some of the earlier problems with glass, then you could have something that becomes more accepting to a wider market, or reaches a bit of a tipping point. But I think glass was significant. But I'll never forget one of our other members, Alexia, I've worked with for many years. They bought a bunch, and we went down to an award ceremony in London called the Digitals at Tobacco Wharf, and he walked the length of about 4 miles from the hotel to the event. We walked, and he had his glasses on, and he asked about 13 people for directions. I'm like, can you not just ask the glasses, for goodness sake? He's like, well, I'm just being friendly, So he's like, he still couldn't kind of rationalize why he was wearing them in some way. But yeah, I think that it did, even though that there's a lot to be learned from things that don't work out quite, or maybe that was always the intention. I don't know.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I remember when I had a project funded by Nesta, which is the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts in the UK, and co-funded also by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and Arts Council of England. And it was a program of work that was around sort of digital R&D for the arts, so experimenting with new platforms. And we had a project that was about drones and creativity. And I swear, every session we had with the Nesta team, the focus of the conversation was about failure.
Yeah.
And I know that, of course, we do sort of put pressure on ourselves for success in research and do things that work. But the narrative was clearly about, I think, the relationship between failure and experimentation. And if you're not really experimenting, then if you're not failing, you're not really experimenting. And I think that was the implication, that actually out of failure comes innovation. And that's probably true also of platforms like Google Glass, where a lot of other things happened as a result of it. So I know that Google Glass relaunched in 2018 or 19, I think it was, as a industry product, so being used for a whole range of sort of interfaces. And at the time when it was launched, back in 2012, 13, that was one of the sort of key narratives, that this wasn't really just a sort of lifestyle application, not just a kind of mini mobile phone on your forehead. It was actually something that could help you do things. So there were some great explorer videos, they called them, which were industry people that were doing amazing things, from a firefighter driving a truck and using the glass as a way of navigating, so that he could see where the sort of fire hydrants were and then locate the truck accordingly. And there was examples of surgeons that were there. And so I think that these were aiming to be disruptive in that interface. Katya's just joining from IBM Research. She's saying, forget Google Glass, gesture control is the future. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I guess it's interesting though, because I think that was one of the things that Glass did have as part of its integration. It was a nice sort of gaming interface where you could sort of play a game by swiping things in midair. But the question is, why did it fail? Why did it fail as a device? I think there were lots of reasons, but practical reasons. But
I think it looked really, really uncool, and I'm not sure the public was quite ready for the idea that people could be being recorded whilst they're being looked at them as well, which is a problem, isn't it? Apart from anything, so sometimes the technology's there, but the people aren't quite ready for it. I mean, it's kind of the same with autonomous vehicles, isn't it? The tech is there, it's developing, but are we quite ready to, give up our petrol engines or even a hybrid cars? So it's going to be a painful. It could be in the future. You don't need any parking spaces anymore, so you can grow a nice vegetable patch in your garden. So it brings about redesign of entire industries and infrastructures and cities and things like that as well. But that's a painful and slow transition, isn't it? We can't just simply replace our combustion engine car that we paid a fortune for, that we love, with an autonomous vehicle like overnight.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, which is why, again, sort of going back to what is disruptive technology, it's very much, we really need to come to terms with the systems and sort of ecosystems around artifacts that allow us to then explain whether or not they're disruptive, but also to clarify what is the disruption that's taking place. Because I tend to think of disruptive technology as almost a kind of leftist project, that it's trying to wrestle power from the few and distribute it more widely. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee, when sort of working on the web, came up with the phrase, the now famous phrase, "This is for everyone." And financially, that's clearly not the case, because of course, and you can see how there's that sort of anxiety about the size of big social media companies, and how I remember there was a great application. This was about 2013-14, called Word Lens. Did you ever come across this?
The name rings a bell. Go on, tell me.
So this was amazing at the time. This was simply a mobile phone application. You hold up your camera and point it at some text, and it will translate it into the language that you understand. I think it was around for maybe a couple of years, and then I think Google bought it essentially and integrated it into Google Translate. So that acquisition of other companies by mega sort of transmedia companies is just one of the challenges we face.
It is. I mean, that's another kind of ethics question as well that's on everyone's lips. But I can see there's quite a few people. So hi to Wasim, Miho, Katia, Jamie, and so forth as well. There's a couple of good comments there as well. Katia's mentioned about aiming high flying cars. It reminds me of Back to the Future, doesn't it? Where we're going, we don't need any roads.
So we can't trust Katia. She wants to go to space. Everything is taking her vertically.
Well, I think in other cities, like in Brazil, for example, there's a lot more prevalence of helicopters, isn't there? It's like one kind of disruptive tech solution that has been around for a while to solve the problem of traffic and so forth, isn't it? And also I was doing a keynote on digital sport in Rio, and they said, the big kind of mountains everywhere. They said, some decades ago, the army just decided to go and drill through them. So it's it needs must sometimes, isn't it? You're going to try and build out the infrastructure of a city, get the army involved, and go and drill through some mountains.
For sure. And I remember a couple of years ago seeing sort of video footage of flying cars, and I sort of wonder. There's that moment where a technology sort of is sort of on the horizon, and you sort of think, wow, this is incredible. And then all of a sudden it sort of becomes part of your reality. I remember, drones were a bit like that. Certainly, even the more recent things, like if you think of what is really sort of recently genuinely disruptive, I would suggest are things like electric scooters that are now deployed across cities as kind of sharing economy vehicles, which have dramatically transformed many cities around the world. It's recently been present in the UK, so we see that in Manchester and Liverpool and other places where that's beginning to be deployed. And of course, it changes the behaviours of people that are within those cities. So you're less likely perhaps to walk around or ride a bicycle. And yet I remember also in Barcelona in the last sort of 4 to 5 years, electric bicycles and electric scooters have massively changed the city, where you've gone from having many people bombing around on mopeds essentially to now going big distances on these bikes and scooters.
Oh, absolutely. Jamie's mentioned the Google Glass spoof where it filtered out right wing headlines. But I think with VR and AR, these things have been around for years, haven't we? But we're always on the cusp of this disruptive tech kind of changing the world in different areas, I guess. And AR, I think a big moment for AR was things like Pokemon Go, wasn't it? But we seem to be finally on the brink of something. I remember seeing a VR headset in a Meadowhall shopping centre in Sheffield about 25 years ago, thinking, wow, this is the future. And we're still kind of wow, this is the future, But I think certainly with lockdown, we've seen a lot more Oculus headsets sold, for example. And I think when you start to look at sales trends and so forth, we're always looking for that killer app, aren't we? And it seems to be still kind of around gaming, doesn't it? Like Pokemon Go or some of the VR games and so forth as well. But there's clearly other sectors of which VR and AR could disrupt. We're still kind of scratching around for what exactly that is, I guess.
I think so, and that's again where there's sort of anxieties about whether we call something disruptive. And I think and that's why it's interesting, I think, as an organization to work among artists, because you often find that artists are the ones that are really sort of tinkering with the technology before it becomes mainstream and trying to explore its potential. And when we started our drones project, that was very much the case. It was not at all mainstream. You would begin only sort of a year after it started to see them come up in high streets and actually feel part of our everyday world. And now they're so sort of normalized now that I think it's hard to say that they are genuinely sort of disruptive in a civilian sense. But of course, we see them being used in research in all sorts of ways. So we've got a wonderful application called Snot Bot, which is a drone that's been modified by marine biologists, and it will carry a kind of petri dish and fly out over a whale so that when it blows snot through its blowhole, it captures the DNA and then allows them to take it back to the lab and sample it and evaluate the health of the whale. So you kind of have to be someone that wants to tinker with things and modify them in some way to really be disruptive, I think.
No, absolutely. I think it's always looking for that killer app, isn't it? I think hardware providers, they bring out these amazing things and do a little demo, but it's got to have something kind of practical that kind of solves some type of human problem, hasn't it, on mass, really. So there were various kind of incarnations of social media before Facebook came along and became the thing that everybody uses, but it could have just remained a little niche, couldn't it, within universities in America, for example, and gone no further. But it just happened to hit I suppose again, Bill, when you get to the point where you've got ubiquitous mobile devices, that creates a new business model for that, the right thing at the right time, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Katia said she's building a flying car in her backyard, which I could believe, in all honesty. I think but actually a lot of people have been modifying technologies. And one of the things that I remember, I went to Google a few years ago and was able to see some of their sort of prototype autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
And the person explaining what they were doing, he said that they certainly don't want people to intervene. If you're in the driverless car, it looks like something bad is going to happen. Can you stop it? And of course, it's set up to prohibit you from doing that. So if you, on the assumption that if you did try to intervene with the car, then you're likely to make things worse. And I think that's one of the things that's really challenging with technology, is that people have to sort of develop a sense of trust in it before it becomes something they're willing to accept. And that's so then again, sort of what is disruptive technology? I think to some extent, disruptive technology is very much a kind of engagement where you're sort of almost trying to establish what level of trust you have of it. And I saw, a great example of this was last July when the WHO launched their digital healthcare worker. So you can now, if you have a smoking problem, you can now access your personal AI-backed healthcare worker with whom you interface and sort of talk about your addiction. And the proposition is that for people that have addictions, when they go to see a human healthcare worker, they may not be completely honest about their behaviors and habits or their failure to sort of stop smoking. Whereas if you can talk to a computer, you're likely to be more honest and therefore likely to have more effective interventions. So you can see the logic behind it, and you can see how it's massively disruptive potentially, where you then are bypassing healthcare professionals, human healthcare professionals. But it becomes normal soon.
We wrote a book chapter on for a book called Football's Medicine around the FanFit project, and talking about kind of social prescribing and so forth. So the Nesta fund we got was the Healthier Lives Data Fund, and it's kind of about empowering citizens to kind of take control of their own health and well-being and so forth as well. So you'd hope that in our kind of utopian vision of the world, that the technology can kind of help people to maintain, measure and maintain and encourage and connect and so forth as well. I was just thinking about Jamie's point about Meadow Hall. I think that kind of mole idea kind of, it did kind of seem like the future, didn't it, with the Trafford Centre and so forth. But at the moment, with the current situation, we're now scratching our heads, aren't we, about about these physical spaces and the redesign of those, and what the role of digital is in these things, I suppose. So it's interesting, isn't it? And likewise, Katia is saying about the chat rooms in VR, but I think it seems to me that social media like Facebook, it was kind of nailed the two-dimensional social media through becoming unchained from the laptop onto your mobile and checking it 20, 30 times a day. But obviously the intention with the purchase of Oculus is things like Facebook Horizons, isn't it? So personally, I think it's still it seems to be in the domain of gamers, things like Second Life and Facebook and Horizons. But obviously, as the young people of the 20 somethings of today become the 30 and 40 somethings, and they've got the headsets, again, it becomes more acceptable to do social media using virtual reality, I guess. So I reckon that's probably a slow evolution, isn't it, from social media from 2 to 3D? But I guess we'll see.
I think so. We talked about also running some events in the platform Spatial, which is an Oculus Quest platform, which is essentially like that. You kind of set up your own virtual space, put your headset on, and off you go into this environment where you've got a sort of, I mean, I say it's primitive, but it's probably the first 3D rendering of your sort of physical form that I've seen within a social VR space. And it sort of makes everyone look a bit creepy, but it does feel like a social environment. But the thing is, I suppose, my feeling is that, I know lots of people that are experimenting with VR. I don't know lots of people that are really using it as part of their day-to-day life. And that's one of the things that I think maybe there's some research to be done there. But I think even I have my VR headset sort of sitting on a sofa, and they don't often get picked up. So a bit like Google Glass, what leads something to become kind of ubiquitously used across somebody's day? It's not that often that you find those things. The television, the radio, the mobile phone. There aren't many things that enjoy that degree of sort of exposure in our lives.
Yeah, it's true that actually. I totally agree. I wrote a little short chapter in a book called "You're on Mute." Going like beyond the Zoom call into other areas. And I was doing a bit of a science fiction prototyping, which is good fun, or micro science fiction prototyping, and just sort of speculating on where we might be in 25 years with these technologies. But it's kind of I'm the same, that I've got a couple of headsets here, Oculus headsets, and I think it's great. But would you spend as much time that as you do on your mobile phone or watching telly or on a games console? I don't know, and I suppose there's other kind of ways these things might develop. The headsets keep improving. There's kind of the projections and other kind of immersive type environments that we could use and so forth as well. So it's interesting to see how it goes on, but whether the future is in headsets or not, I'm not sure. People want to, they're a bit cumbersome, aren't they, for kind of using for too long. And I think it's that question of something that you can use continually and easily without it becoming a big drama, isn't it? And I think the idea of kind of blocking out reality is a bit challenging as well, because you need to be able to kind of multitask, don't you? So if you've got your headset on, the doorbell rings or something pings on your phone or something, you've got to go off, right, take the thing off, go and answer the door, and it's a bit harder to multitask, isn't it? So it's interesting. Miho's asking about whether Clubhouse is popular in the UK. Miho's from Japan. She's saying it's really increased dramatically in Japan. Have you used Clubhouse or come across it yet, Andy?
I haven't, Alex. Tell me about it.
All right. Okay. So I randomly got involved with this digital and sustainability fashion company from New York, and they were talking quite a bit about it recently. It's my understanding, and Miho can probably explain a little bit more, but it's kind of like I believe it's only on iPhone at the moment, and it's like a Clubhouse in different topics. I think it's just iPhone, and I think it's just audio. I know our collaborator Naomi Timperley was running some kind of little collaborations on it as well. But as an Android user, I can't use it. And also, I think it works on invites. So you've got to invite somebody in, and then they've got to pick up and use the invite. Otherwise, you don't get any more invites. But it seems to be kind of have that kind of virality about it in terms of it's like the new disruptive thing, that you should be on board, But talking to a guy from New York, he was absolutely buzzing about it. He'd met someone quite prominent from the blockchain industry and followed that up on LinkedIn. So it's growing, I think, but it probably strikes me that it's probably bigger in Japan and America at the moment than it is in the UK. I don't know if anyone else has got any experience of that.
I mean, that's where, again, it was sort of a lot of the things we're talking about in terms of disruptive technology. It is
Yeah.
about sort of trends, fashions, and I guess to some extent feeling part of the wave of excitement that occurs around those activities. It's not so, in that
Yeah.
sense, principles are not so different from things like the entertainment industry, where the premiere of a film or release of albums and singles generates that degree of sort of investment from people that feels then that you're witnessing something special or important
Mm-hmm.
or new. And in many respects, disruptive technology, I think, works often because it promises us something that's different, that's perhaps going to enrich our lives.
Yeah.
And I suppose the many things that we sort of research, the digital side of things, there's always a kind of double edge around that, because clearly a lot of the presence that we have in digital space now has also been met with kind of criticism for the way in which it leads to either sort of lack of social interactions outside of online spaces, or indeed it sort of transforms our relationships with each others in ways that may not be ideal. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that's really, really difficult to sort of close the book on. But you sort of see, I mean, you know that I'm doing some work on TikTok at the moment,
Yeah.
and I've seen quite a lot of things in TikTok that one would think are quite worrisome.
Mm.
And despite me being a huge advocate for the platform in terms of creativity and experimentation,
Yeah.
and indeed the communication of all sorts of really great messages, there
Yeah.
are sort of vulnerabilities there that I think
Mm.
can often remain quite obscure, that unless you get into the platform, you don't even know what they are.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Mio's describing Clubhouse like social radio. Now, that doesn't sound very innovative, does it? But it's quite interesting looking at the rise of things like Clubhouse, social radio, and podcasting and so forth, which the concept of which is ancient, isn't it? Audio recording, or getting people to kind of ring in like dial-in shows on the radio and so forth. It's just that, isn't it? But perhaps in the age where we're kind of got slight overload with Zoom calls, people are quite enjoying the idea of just having audio where they don't have to worry too much about the video aspects of it. And certainly we see that with our students, Andy, don't we? When we run kind of online lectures, and they were like, yeah, people turn your videos on. People aren't, they're less likely to do that because, again, they're trying to multitask. They're trying to do multiple things. By switching your video on, it means that you've got to maintain complete focus rather than it's a bit like the what we're saying about the headsets. And as Katia mentions about the holodeck, we can learn a lot, can't we, from science fiction and science fiction prototyping and so forth about what the trajectory of these things might be. So yeah, maybe at some point we go away from headsets that block out reality and are a bit cumbersome towards something that's a bit more flexible, allows us to multitask, like the idea of turning off your video on a video call. You can just kind of do multiple things at once, can't you, while still kind of interacting. It's the whole second, third screen idea as well, Andy, I guess, and people's attention spans.
For sure. And I think that for me, one of the things that's really interesting is just how much scope there is to transform our lives through these technologies. I think what always draws me to emerging technology is that potential for change. And I think that also becomes a kind of currency within this world, that if you can transform people's lives, then this becomes the way to feel that you are disrupting something. And certainly some of the work we've done recently looking at things like tracking technologies, mobile applications. I remember the platform Zombies Run, which was one of the really interesting propositions, where you put in your headsets and you press play and you go off for a run, and you find yourself as a character within a story, and you have to play out the different sort of storylines that the app is presenting. But but it's something that still is, I think, quite niche, and it's how you get to something that is really mainstream whilst maintaining that disruptive characteristic of it. And I'm not sure it's possible. Things will obviously change as an industry, so it's clear that platforms like Google have transformed a whole of industries in terms of how they produce their outputs. I work with the Olympic Games a lot, and back in 2006 and 7, YouTube was really not very much at all a presence in the Olympic world. And by 2008, they were broadcasting across 80 territories worldwide in YouTube, and particularly in places that didn't have a kind of television infrastructure, which was partly why it was really valuable, because you could then make sure you reach people in ways that conventional means just weren't allowing at all.
Yeah, I'm glad you've mentioned sport and gaming, because that's like one of our favourite topics, isn't it? And of course, there's a massive opportunities, I think, within that for disruptive tech. But as we're seeing with kind of VR, gaming is kind of leading the way, isn't it, on that front? But the whole sort of concept of what is sport now is being kind of blurred, isn't it? Through we can't physically get into stadiums at the moment, so obviously the technology's got a role to play from that perspective. But equally, the technology is kind of becoming the sport, isn't it? With things like esports kind of working its way into the Olympics bit by bit, and obviously it's a massive global phenomena as well.
For sure, and it's such a fascinating and controversial subject. And I've got an event later this week for Global Sports Week. And what I've noticed over the last 5 years is esports going from being really marginal to the sports world to now becoming not quite mainstream, but certainly something that the sports world's really trying to partner with.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly to do with that history of disruptive technology within that sector. So if you think about these events as being wholly reliant on the kind of economic investments that come out of the televisual industries, a lot of the income that comes into sports is through TV rights and the sale of them. If that model is now no longer effective as a way of bringing income into the sports, then something major needs to change. And I think at the same time, we see huge amounts of transformation take place in the consumption habits of audiences. So we see more streaming, and you don't have to be an expert to see that change take place. I mean, I remember being on a train, maybe, gosh, feels like a long time ago, maybe over a year ago, certainly now. But it was a casual sort of commuter train, busy, and there was a lad there who was probably 20-something years old, and he has a mobile phone out, and he was watching a streaming gaming content. I can't remember what it was, but it sort of spoke to the way in which those audiences have changed their habits from televisual content to game streams, and that's majorly disruptive. It's disruptive to the industries, and it's disruptive to, I think, also creators as well. So you start to think about, well, what does it mean to be a filmmaker today? And it actually means something very different because of these new phenomena.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually. Yeah, I've just noticed arts and media department have kind of rebranded themselves. They've added the word kind of the creative technologies within there, and starting to do kind of video creation with analytics and things. So it opens up really interesting possibilities, doesn't it, for these kind of overlaps and crossovers between different disciplines and things as well, as they kind of evolve. And the interesting bit becomes where the overlap is between the two as well.
It really does. And I think that part of that is also less about the product or the output of whatever is designed, and more about the sort of underpinning collaboration that's taking place. So with this drones project, with those funding partners from research, from technology, and from the arts, this was the first time that they've done anything like this. So you can see how innovation is possible partly by just making sure you allow different people from different expertise backgrounds to talk to each other across a common topic. And I think that's partly, that's all you need to do to actually create something that really is transformative. And I think a lot of what the research we do at Salford is trying to bring those multidisciplinary conversations across sectors, so that you do have that cross-fertilization of ideas. But it's still something that I would say, in terms of the institutions, is quite limited. It's still something that is not at all widespread, and something that I think we need to do more of.
Yeah.
Katya's just posted as well that her 13-year-old's favorite shows are about others playing Fortnite, which is just
mind blowing, isn't it? I mean, I got my first computer when I was 7 years old, and I had a video gaming console in the 70s. And I suppose in the 70s and 80s it was an exploding phenomenon, but mainly kind of young males. But now it's very, not only is it kind of ubiquitous for people to play, to play games, but watching people play games. Yeah, all right, you go around to your friend's house and watch them playing something else, but having a million viewers playing a computer game, it's mind blowing, isn't it? But that's the world we're living in, isn't it?
It is, and again, part of what fascinates me is just, what will those young people be like 10 years from now? What will be their sort of inclinations in terms of watching content? I think that if you look at something like TikTok, we've got videos that are between 15 seconds and 60 seconds. And the way in which people consume the content is by scrolling through videos constantly. In fact, there's a student at Salford University whose videos went viral on TikTok recently, and she's created a mini series within the platform, so you can
Nice. Yeah.
see how you can bring completely new forms of creativity into the environment and change what audiences do. So yeah, Miah has just mentioned as well, casual moviegoers switch to the game. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know what you think, Alex, but I think that's one of the we've seen in the past sort of games being transformed into films, and I think that relationship's being completely unpacked through creativity now.
I was talking to a American recently from a very large fizzy drinks company, and he said if you're a brand in 2025 and you don't have an ecosystem, you're going to have a really tough time of it. So the idea that you blend in gaming with the movie side of things, with the merchandise side of things, with the smartphone app and wearable side of things, and that's where we get an ecosystem. And I guess if you look at Google, the companies we've got now, Apple, they've created those ecosystems, haven't they, around the technologies. I was watching a live broadcast from one of the big Japanese providers recently, and they were like, right, here's our new state-of-the-art, earbuds that connects perfectly with the phone, that connects perfectly with that. So you've got your perfect ecosystem, haven't you? That talk to each other. And then obviously from the media perspective, that's created that system as well, isn't it? And that's been kind of part of Apple's success, hasn't it? That ecosystem of the right wire. You've got the iPhone, you've got the iPad, you've got the MacBook Pro, and the things work together. And that seems to be kind of a lot of value in that, doesn't it? That the overlaps between different media and different hardware as well.
I think so. And yet I do also sort of think about what is an ideal system. I know there's a company that has been developing a modular mobile phone. So it's sort of championing principles of sustainability, because of course it's clear that many of the sort of resources we use now are fueling the digital industries. And of course, many of us will also have many mobile phones sitting in our houses doing nothing. And we have to update everything every couple of years. So I think part of the things we need to think about is how disruptive technology sort of aligns with a range of other values that we hold. So we're starting to think a lot about at the university, a lot about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how those might relate to the way in which we aim to disrupt through technology. And I think certainly there's a case to be made for really evaluating the disruptiveness of a technology against those sustainable development goals, and arguing that in fact if they're not really hitting the targets, if they're not really thinking about these principles, then they're actually not disrupting at all. They're maintaining a situation in which we remain kind of rampant consumers of products and services in order to support our comfortable lifestyles. And that's probably a crucial thing to bear in mind too.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of societal problems created by technology, isn't there? But equally, some technology solutions to some of those problems as well. So I suppose we mentioned briefly before, about these big companies and the monopolies of them, the way they're kind of creating markets that are just kind of allowing us to keep consuming more stuff. I mean, blockchain's a good example as well as something that, like, the principle of it is quite empowering. That you're not tied to particular banks and governments, but the reality is that the amount of power required to mine bitcoins is absolutely phenomenal, isn't it? Which might open up opportunities for other countries that have got an abundance of hydroelectric power, for example. But there's so many questions, isn't there, from an ethical perspective around the creation and sort of maintenance and operation from a monopolist perspective of these big companies. And as you say, the kind of the sheer kind of physical resources that all this technology eats up, from power to precious and rare materials. So there's some huge questions around that, which I hope we can, and I'm sure we'll pick up in this series as well, starting with fashion next week, because obviously there's a big some huge questions around technology and sustainability in fashion as well.
Massively. And I think that's partly what these events really about, is drilling down into disruptive technologies and trying to come up with, I guess, a sort of notion of disruption that we're comfortable with ethically, or indeed as a university, as a research team, or as people that want to try to innovate as well, without trying to just diminish the sort of creative innovation that we see around those great examples of hugely successful companies, but also to make sure we allow space for other things to take place now. So Katie has also mentioned she's super biased, but we shouldn't forget AI and quantum when you talk about disruptive tech. So we're going to have to get Katia on, I think, to talk about that level of disruption, which I think is huge, certainly. And AI is a big part of what we're doing, certainly at Salford, and trying to bring that into lots of different industries. So we have a program called the AI Foundry, which is running events later in the month about artificial intelligence across a range of sectors. It's something that I think we see across so many areas now. AI feels like it's part of almost everything now. But I don't know what your impression is, Alex.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. It's yeah, we could talk all day about just that one, Colin, but it certainly should be a topic for discussion on its own. We've just finished a technology innovation module for our final year business and management students, kind of looking at disruptive technologies and coming up with new sort of ideas to solve societal problems. And encouragingly, a large percentage focused on the role of AI and kind of disrupting industries and solving societal problems and things. So that was that's great that's kind of on the radar of business and management type students. So yeah, I think there's huge potential in that, Katia. So thanks for reminding us about that.
And thanks for being here as well. For those people that have joined us in the live event, it's been great to have you here. We're going to wrap things up now, but this is the first of many events that will take place. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got suggestions of speakers, or if you'd like to give a talk yourself or be in a conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Follow the hashtag Passion for Digital, and we'll stay connected across our platforms as well. And with that, I'd like to sort of wrap up and thank Alex for being here. It's great. It's been a good launch. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Alex, what do you think?
We certainly have, as always. We are interested in lots of different topics. So hopefully, there's something for everybody there, and some fantastic comments as well. So Jamie's off to his PG Cap class. Yeah, this is one of the advantages of StreamYard, Jamie. You can come dressed as a chicken if you want next time. We don't mind.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Alex, and hope to see you all soon again. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Okay, see you next time.
Bye-bye.